Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Zanata. I'm your webinar host today. I'm the manager of Benetas's Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing. Welcome to our webinar, In Control to the Very End. In order to get things going today, and we're actually engaging your thought leadership first of all, and some of your thinking. And the question that we have for you today is roughly what percentage of your service users in your aged care service have an advanced care plan? It seems that we've got a small cluster, about 1 in 5 have 3/4 to almost all of their service users, older people using their services, have an advanced care plan. We've got a very large cluster, around 26 to 50%, or that is saying about a quarter to a half of their service users have advanced care plans. And so that's probably a reasonably understood picture that not everyone by any means has an advanced care plan. So we're hoping that today's webinar does certainly help people to think a little bit more about the ways and means they might go about getting more of their service users to have advanced care plans. So now we start with our presenters. So first of all, introducing Sonya Imbesi. Sonya is a physiotherapist and palliative care specialist at Benetas, where she leads the development of contemporary palliative care models across residential and community aged care services. With over a decade of clinical experience across oncology and specialist palliative care settings, she continues to work clinically, supporting complex symptom management and end-of-life decision-making within multidisciplinary teams. Sonya also works in the physiotherapy program at La Trobe University. Her work spans system-level reform, workforce capability, and strengthening advanced care planning processes to support residents and families to navigate care decisions with confidence. Welcome, Sonya.
I thought I'd set the tone today in today's presentation to talk about what I've been observing since working in the aged care sector and about the practical implications of advanced care planning. Advanced care planning is fundamentally about ensuring people retain agency over decisions about their care, even if they later lose the ability to make that decision. There's a strong agreement amongst Australians, that advanced care planning is really important, but engagement remains relatively low. National prevalence, as you can see on the screen, only 33% of Australians have undertaken any form of advanced care plan, which is very interesting, Paul, based on the Menti that we've just done now. Only 6% have completed an advanced care directive, and 19% have discussed future care wishes. So why does this matter to us working in the aged care sector? Well, many residents or clients, depending on which area you work in, are living with frailty, chronic illness, and sometimes cognitive impairment. And ultimately, when they come into our care, as we know, our most significant reason for discharge is the death of our client or resident. So therefore, planning is extremely important. And families are often asked at different times as well to make complex decisions on these people's behalves. When we consider the culturally and linguistically diverse communities, we've got an additional layer of complexity. Often we may have language barriers where we may need to be considering the use of interpreters. We may have some difficulty in them understanding some of the medical or legal implications of advanced care planning. There can be different cultural perspectives around illness, talking about death, dying, end of life, and sometimes medications. And sometimes decisions can be more about making a collaborative approach to decision making instead of individual. Often families are being forced to make decisions at a time of a lot of emotion and distress. And so that's why planning can really ease the burden on everyone involved. These challenges are something that we see frequently in the aged care sector, And one response to this is here at Benetas, we actually have been very fortunate to partner with Palliative Care Victoria through the Dignified and Respectful Decisions project. And I'd really love the opportunity to talk to you about that in a little bit more detail now. The Dignified and Respectful Decisions Project, or DARD, as it's also referred to, was initially created solely by Palliative Care Victoria, and they did that as a co-design project, looking at providing a resource that will help families support older Australians in aged care. Our work with Palliative Care Victoria has been really fortunate to be in two phases of pilot. Firstly, looking at really embedding these resources into residential aged care to help people better plan for their futures. So, why is this needed? In aged care, the issue of families needing to make decisions when a resident may no longer be able to make those decisions and may not have any form of advanced care directive is not that uncommon. Residents often enter care without any advanced care planning. They may lose capacity over time, which I know we're going to speak about a little bit later, and they may experience sudden deterioration. Families can find themselves in situations where they're needing to make decisions about treatments. It may be about hospital transfers or goals of care. And if these conversations haven't been had prior, it can be a very challenging time when, as I mentioned previously, there's a lot of emotion in the space when we really need to be making quite logical decisions. So when it comes to the DARD resource, we used it to be able to be a tool to help to navigate these conversations. The DARD resource is broken up into multiple chapters. It helps family members understand what it might be like entering into care, who may be involved, as well as going into some of the really fine detail about decision making, and includes a glossary of things like what is CPR and what are the statistics about success with recovery after CPR, or what does something look like when someone is actually having artificial intake, etc. It also helps families to sort of sit back and consider what that might mean for their family member, their values and preferences, and start the conversation of advanced care planning. Alongside that, it's been really obvious that staff education around advanced care planning is important, and that can be focused on starting the conversation, as staff often don't know how to broach the topic with families and residents. When it comes to the culturally and linguistically diverse community, the DARD project had already thought of that, which was wonderful. And we're really fortunate that it has been translated into multiple languages. But I do want to comment that it's not just about the translation that's occurred. This was a co-design project with each community group. And even in the resources, you'll actually see photography of the people in these groups so that when residents and families are having these conversations, they're looking at people that feel familiar to them too. Additional multilingual resources are available through Advanced Care Planning Australia. And in Victoria, we're super lucky that Palliative Care Victoria run in-language community advanced care planning sessions to help support this. So I guess the key here is improving access to information is a really important step into improving advanced care planning with our community. So what things have I learnt in this process? And it's still ongoing. I'm still doing one of these projects with Palliative Care Victoria. I think firstly, advanced care planning is a process. It's not a one conversation and we're done. It often involves multiple conversations. It's about building relationships and rapport and really getting to understand somebody so that we can have these more challenging conversations. It's about identifying the right time to start conversations. And when looking at that, it may be at time of admission. That could be in community and in our residential settings, but I don't want our respite residents to be overlooked either. Sometimes respite residents, we can be really good at thinking, oh, they'll just be with us for a short period of time, but often they end up converting into permanent residents, or it may be, when we sit back and think about it, a trigger to a change in their health and a perfect opportunity for us to have an advanced care planning conversation. The other times that are really important to consider advanced care planning is a significant change in health status, maybe a transfer to hospital, or a noticeable clinical deterioration. If we've had these earlier conversations, when these things happen, it means that we can simply implement the plan. But if we don't have some sort of plan beforehand, we're forced to make decisions with the person or their families at that time, and it can be a lot more stressful and overwhelming. The other thing is families often need support. So, if they're a medical treatment decision maker, either by the hierarchy or according to the documentation that they've been signed up on, until they're actually in the position when they're having to make the decision, if their family member no longer has that capacity to make the decisions, I think people don't realize the weight and maybe difficulty that can come with making those decisions and potentially the guilt as well. So, as staff, it's our responsibility to help walk that path with some of the families and medical treatment decision makers so that they understand and feel well informed in the decisions that they're making. For culturally and language diverse families, access to information in their preferred language can obviously improve engagement with advanced care planning discussions. And staff education is critical. Many staff recognise advanced care planning is important. However, it can be very challenging to start the conversation. Our staffing groups are culturally and linguistically diverse as well and may share their own views. We may be navigating family disagreement and the importance of explaining documentation. Finally, there can be documentation confusion. For example, understanding what is an advanced care directive versus an advanced care plan, a medical treatment decision maker versus a power of attorney, which I know is going to be spoken about soon, and a goals of care document. Sometimes these documents are incomplete, they haven't been signed, they may be on the wrong form, and documents aren't often easily accessible in times of need. So they're really important things that we're focusing on. Improving advanced care planning involves supporting conversations and improving staff's and understanding of the entire process. So ultimately, culturally responsive advanced care planning helps ensure a person's values and preferences remain central to care, even when they're no longer able to speak for themselves.
Our next speaker, introducing Dr. Mukesh Haikerwal. Dr. Haikerwal worked as a GP in active practice from 1990 to 2025. He's advocated for better health for all at every stage of his medical career, which has seen him become state and national president of the Australian Medical Association and chair of the Council of the World Medical Association. He's an honorary enterprise professor in the School of Medicine at University of Melbourne and works with Brain Injury Australia. He chaired the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare and the Beyond Blue Doctors Mental Health Program. Previously, he has spearheaded clinical and community efforts to use technology in health and worked for state and federal health committees, including as a commissioner on the National Health and Hospitals Reform Commission. More recently, he was in the thick of the response to COVID-19, running Victoria's first GP respiratory and vaccine clinic and running an innovative aged care project, Healthy Aging, rolled out in the North Altona Clinic in Hobsons Bay, one of Victoria's most ethnically diverse communities. Welcome, Mukesh.
This is a very important topic to me in my work in the community, and was actually a piece of work that we were doing in the various agencies that you've read through. As mentioned, the general practice is in Hobsons Bay, which is the second most ethnically diverse community in Victoria. And as a result, we worked with people from pretty much the whole United Nations in our backyard, and many of the things that we heard Sonya speak about absolutely come to light. And Sonya, it's really good to hear the work that's gone on more recently, because this has been an ongoing issue for decades and really not addressed in a systematic way. It was very much done ad hoc, and something that we certainly felt the need to prepare our patients so that they could enter their retirement and beyond with a good knowledge of what they need to make sure that their wishes are recognised, and also that their legal and health needs are addressed in the way that they want them to be addressed, whilst they still have that capacity. One of the things that actually focused us on this at the very end of my general practice time was a project we worked on with the Medicare Local, with funding from the federal department, on a project called the 4Ms Project, which we call the Healthy Aging Project. And it stems with work from the US, but also where the Dr. Mark Yates, who's a geriatrician in Bendigo. The 4Ms is something that changed the way in which we looked at people as we evaluated them. This is pre going into aged care, certainly in their older years, trying to keep them aging in a healthy manner. The 4Ms refer to what matters to them up front. And often what matters to them is a specific issue in their health, but also about aging and how they would not want to be a burden on their families into the future. Movement, probably very much in your bailiwick there, Sonya. Very important that people do keep moving, both for their own health and welfare, but also it's a marker on how they're continuing through their wellness. Mind, obviously very important in that space. And then medications. And the medications piece is the piece that we as doctors would do in this process, and it would talk about the various needs of someone as they're preparing, and to have the right sorts of documentation in this space. It was the other M, which is now part of this more internationally, is around multi-complexity, which I don't need to tell you on this webinar that we are dealing with not one problem anymore. People have multiple problems and multiple complexity, and bring those together and dealing with them becomes really quite difficult and challenging. And it's really important that we take control in this area with the patient and their family agreed, because that making everyone in the family be on the same page is something that helps the situation as people's health deteriorates and as their needs increase and their ability to make those decisions for themselves diminishes. One set of words that I was always taught about, and probably is where this whole push around end-of-life decision-making and advanced care has come from, is, you try your best. In medicine, we talk about first do no harm. But one of those adages is about not striving efficiously to keep alive. There's so much you can do. There's so much you may be asked to do, but should you be doing that? Is that what people's wishes are? And is that in their best interest to have every intervention that's available, which may be detrimental in its own way and not provide for a decent set of words? And another part of my work in this area was about looking and integrating this into technology. Obviously, if you've got a document, it's good for that to be accessible at a time that's needed. In our practice, we would keep in our practice software, we would keep a copy of the various documents to hand. And also we would make sure that we tried to upload it onto the My Health record. So people may or may not know, we all have a My Health record, which is sitting on the cloud if you've not opted off it. It's not current practice all the time, but you can certainly ask for an aged care directive, and it can actually be uploaded and seen there. And you never know, if you look on somebody's My Health record, which you can do as a registered health professional, you may be able to see one of those. I wanted to show something that was only recently published in the Medical Journal of Australia's Insight, which is about succession planning in health professionals, in medical professionals in this case, but affects all of us. And that is always a confronting discussion about, well, I'm only in my 30s, why should I have a will? And for myself to do my enduring power of attorney to my son, again, becomes quite a sharp and take a breath, having to do this, understanding it needs to be done, and then going ahead and doing it. So this article talked about estate planning during life. And the whole enduring power of attorney thing is really very important. And it's a notion that everybody should be able to understand, because what happens if you get hit by a bus? Need somebody to look after your affairs. The enduring power of attorney, the need is understandable. But again, I suspect if you did that same survey, you'd find an awful lot of people don't have these. And in our practice, it was very much something we always would go through, not just as part of that project, but as part of people's health and welfare, and looking after them and getting them prepared and being aware of all the things that are useful. The second one, the appointment of a medical treatment decision maker, is relatively new. It's a Victorian thing. And I was quite good at doing this sort of stuff, and I'd have my templates there, and I'd send people to the office of the public advocate to get some of these forms. And then all of a sudden, this one popped up. Very important, nonetheless, and it's important to talk about that. Powers of attorney become important if you're going into other issues, and actually your own business life. What's really important then is the will, the enduring power of attorney, both a financial and a personal one, the medical decision maker. It's so important that your will is known to people around you in case you can't espouse them yourself when that comes there into time. And superannuation, we all now have superannuation, and making sure that that's properly catered for. Otherwise, that has its own set of problems. What I found very interesting in this article to the medical fraternity was it didn't talk about advanced care directives at all. And in reality, it shows how painful a conversation it can be, how difficult it can be, but actually it's so important and central in the way in which we do things. And of course, the community around us, as I said, which was made up of the whole United Nations, everyone had a different way of dealing with these and addressing them. Some were very much upfront and happy to do this. Others took they felt that they were being asked to make decisions they didn't really feel that they had any understanding or knowledge of. And certainly the use of interpreters and other services is important. And that's why I was really pleased to hear Sonia's comments about some of these resources that are now available and enabled in this space. And I think that makes a massive difference to people and their health and welfare and security as they retire, age, and head into aged care and unfortunately beyond. Thank you.
There's a whole package of decisions and settings and values and what we want to achieve that we need to think about. So even beyond advanced care planning, there's all these other matters that are really important insofar as being able to stay in control to the very end. Finally now, I'd like to introduce Mayada Dib. Mayada is a barrister at law at the Victorian Bar. Mayada was admitted to practice as a lawyer in Victoria in 1993 and has an interest in medico-legal work and ethics. Mayada currently holds a number of positions in addition to law, including as a non-executive director with CoHealth, as chair of Soundfair, and as the legal representative on the Victoria University Human Research Ethics Committee. As a person from a culturally and linguistically diverse background herself, Mayada is well positioned to contribute to conversations about healthcare and the law for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Welcome, Mayada.
We've just heard that planning is all about giving people a voice in their healthcare decisions, even if one day they can't speak for themselves. We've also heard that for those working in healthcare or aged care, advanced care planning is central. It helps deliver person-centred care, reduces stress for families, and ensures that treatment aligns with the person's values and preferences. Having said that, as a barrister, I see it from a slightly different perspective, so that even where there's been advanced care planning, disputes still happen. Families may disagree on treatment, question whether a directive applies. They may contest whose has decision-making authority, or challenge a person's capacity to make their own decisions. And for our audience today, what's complicating matters is that the laws differ from between states and territories, with variations in the forms, in the terminology and legal requirements. And I note that my colleagues today made reference to certain things today, but they are, just take note that they are Victoria specific. So for guidance, there is a list of websites that will be provided to you which address this subject matter in great detail. And I understand they are on the resources page of the Centre for Cultural Diversity in Ageing. If you are limited in your time, I recommend the Advanced Care Planning Australia website, which is an excellent resource for advanced care planning considerations across Australia. It also has resources in various languages, which is really useful for what we're talking about today. Also, the other thing that I think you need to have a look at if you're short on time is to have a look at the National Framework for Advanced Care Planning documents. This provides great detail about conversations to be had. This is amongst families with individuals. Then about making the documents and accessing and enacting the advanced care plans. And when it comes to access, there are issues about knowing whether an individual has a plan or has an enduring power of attorney and the like. So it's very important that people know where to find them and access them, and my health record is one of them. So advanced care planning should be considered as part of the broader estate planning that people consider, and Mukesh has gone into that. And so it's in my talk today, I'll be talking about advanced care directives, the appointment of substitute decision makers, which Mukesh referred to as medical treatment decision maker, which is what we call it in Victoria, and powers of attorney and wills. And it's crucial that the legal requirements are met to ensure documents are valid, otherwise their validity and application will be challenged and possibly can't be relied upon. So clarity is very important. In the short time we have, I intend to touch on what constitutes a directive and what is a substitute decision maker. And if we have time, I'd like to provide some examples of issues that might arise and that I see in the tribunal. For clarity and for those interested, this paper will not cover voluntary assisted dying. I don't consider voluntary assisted dying to be part of estate planning. It is something that is discrete and separate to today's conversation. In Australia, a substitute decision maker cannot decide on voluntary assisted dying for another person, just for clarity there. So moving on, what exactly is an advanced care directive? Essentially, it's a formal document where a person records their preferences for future healthcare. It can include the treatments they would accept or refuse, their personal values and life goals, and in some places, it can also appoint a substitute decision maker. The key principle to understand is that advanced care directives generally only come into play if the person loses decision-making capacity. If they can still make decisions, their current choices always take priority. Advanced care directives can take two forms. They are either instructional directives or values directives. And an instructional directive, sometimes called a binding treatment direction, are legally binding. An example of an instructional directive is a person might make it would say, if I have advanced dementia and am no longer able to recognize my family, I do not want life-sustaining interventions such as resuscitation or tube feeding. The other directive, the values directive, this is broader. Values directives describe a person's beliefs or care priorities. For example, I value independence over prolonging life, or I would prefer comfort and dignity rather than aggressive interventions. They guide both substitute decision makers and clinicians, but they are not legal binding. They may be considered must be considered when decisions are made, but they don't compel a specific action. Every instructional directive is not necessarily absolute. As I said, they are legally binding, but they are not absolute. There are some circumstances where they no longer apply. So one scenario is in cases of changed circumstances since the directive was made. The other one that Mukesh, I think, mentioned, and that is if futility or professional standards may be relevant. So if treatments would be clinically futile, unsafe, illegal, or contrary to professional standards, then the directive does not compel clinicians to act. And of course, if there's any ambiguity in the instructional directives, then they don't apply. They're just vague, and they may be treated as values guidance. As for the definition of a substitute decision maker, and in Victoria they're called a medical treatment decision maker, these individuals are legally authorised to make healthcare decisions for someone who lacks capacity. Again, they need to have lost capacity. They can be appointed by the person themselves before losing capacity, or recognised under state and territory legislation, including by tribunal appointments of guardians. Some legislation provides a hierarchy, and I know that Sonya referred to that. For example, if someone hasn't made a medical treatment decision maker appointment in Victoria, then their spouse is the first individual who can make decisions under legislation. This, again, varies among jurisdictions, and I urge you to check yours. Disputes sometimes arise around the authority of the substitute decision maker, namely whether that decision maker is acting in the person's best interests. And these disputes overlap with other disputes to do often with financial or legal arrangements, such as under wills or powers of attorney. And that's when I see these issues. So practical tips for clinicians include clarifying the substitute decision maker's authority up front. Have a look at the document, make sure it's valid. Documenting the capacity assessments and decisions carefully is also critical. So decision-making capacity is a core concept to this subject, and it arises in a planning stage when people are making directives and appointing substitute decision makers, and at the stage when it is necessary for those decision makers to step into their role. I can't emphasize the importance of having these assessments made. They are crucial to minimize disputes and ensure directives are applied appropriately. I encourage people to seek a relevant report on decision making to avoid any doubt later on. The report should be prepared contemporaneously to ensure it documents the position at the time the individual is making decisions relating to advanced care directives or appointing a substitute decision maker. And to that end, it's important to get medical practitioners like geriatricians and psychiatrists to prepare those reports. Neuropsychologists should be used to make an assessment when cognitive impairment, dementia, or brain injury are involved. I have got some examples, but I'll move on from those. But just basically, the take home here is the lesson here is that family disagreements is common, and facilitated discussions, documentation, and escalation to tribunals may be necessary where planning hasn't happened ahead. So planning ensures that an individual's values and preferences guide treatment if they lose capacity, and early planning is crucial. Clear documentation, careful capacity assessment, and awareness of exceptions are essential to reduce conflict and deliver patient-centred care.
Do you think we'll ever have one advanced care plan that crosses all states in Australia? And how does it work if someone has made a directive, for example, an instructional directive in Victoria? Does that hold in New South Wales, or does it the equivalent in New South Wales, does it have any effect in Victoria?
I can't see us very quickly having one common law, because as you know, we are a federation. Every state and territory have their own laws when it comes to this issue. It's not a federal issue. Maybe one day we will reach a stage as a country where people can coordinate these things. But even when there's attempts at coordination, it doesn't always work well, and I see it in other parts of the work that I do. In terms of the actual application, again, different laws, different circumstances. I urge people to have a look at those websites and the framework, because it is actually raised, and different states and territories do allow for some directives to apply across the state or territory, and others you might need to look at some common law exceptions. But other than that, it would be a huge task to tell you specifically what each law is. It is there in legislation, so I urge people to start looking with those websites that I mentioned. They're very useful.
I just wanted to make 2 points. So firstly, I attended the Advanced Care Planning Australia conference back in, I think it was about August 2024, and this came up as a topic. And then Dr. Greg Parker was talking. So I just wanted to make everyone aware that Advanced Care Planning Australia are very aware of this as an issue. I also attended the Oceanic Palliative Care Conference in September last year, and this has actually been done as a research project on whether advanced care directives and all of the different forms of documents could be created as one. Ultimately, as a lot of research, it came out that further needs to be done, but ultimately it talked about the fact that there would be significant difficulty at this time due to the diversity of how this is implemented, the different documents, the different terminology, etc. So it's definitely a part of conversation and in the area of advanced care planning and palliative care generally, but I think it's something that is way down the line.
Can you explain the need for interpreters in advanced care planning and end-of-life care for older people? In situations like, what do we do if an older person prefers their family to interpret for them? What might be the risks? And what are those risks if we use family members as interpreters, as against possibly using a formal interpreter, and even what could be the risks with using formal interpreters? What might go wrong even in that scenario? We're very pro people using formal interpreters, but I'd just like to explore that space a little bit more about the role of interpreters, because we certainly message strongly as the centre that for very important things such as signing service agreements, doing general care plans, doing advanced care plan, it's often good to think about having a formal accredited interpreter involved.
People often prefer their families to be doing the interpreting for them and giving them the right guidance about what to say, what not to say, which of course then comes with its own baggage, if you like, which people have their own interpretations, which may not be justifiable. But I think that if that decision making is happening where somebody, that discussion is curated by, in our case, we would do it with general practice in the practice, or with a general practice nurse, you'd get some understanding of what their pain points are. And I think some of the finer points you might need to get a professional external interpretation service, which I guess is gold standard. But even sometimes in hospitals, they'll bring in some people on the staff who happen to have a language skill, and it becomes their interpretation rather than what they're actually being asked to interpret, and that becomes problematic too. But nonetheless, I think some kind of a nod to getting someone who actually understands the patient in their own native tongue will be a much better thing than simply trying to do it by sign language or talking more loudly, which tends to be the bad old way of doing things. So I think this whole trend towards the use of formal interpretation is important, but I do think that it has its own problems. And as long as there is a good rapport with the patient and their relative, by and large, it should be okay. But this is where Mayada also said it's important to understand that there's often conflict within the family. And that's when you absolutely need someone from outside.
As someone growing up in a multicultural family, I always ensure there is an interpreter there if it's a serious matter. But I also sit in with them because I sometimes find that the interpreters don't always get it right, or they stumble. Like my father had cancer, and the interpreter and the doctor was talking about palliative care and using the word palliative care. The interpreter was uncomfortable saying it and couldn't find the right word because of the culture that we're from. So I jumped in and said, "Oh, it's pain relief." And she then said, "Oh, yes, pain relief." So it's also understanding how it can be taken. But as a lawyer, I think it's also very important for people to keep in mind that whilst having family there is important, a lot of the cases that I have, and that's more to do with powers of attorney, financial issues, is that especially with people who have cognitive decline, they're vulnerable, exploitation happens within the family. One family member takes them under their wing, convinces them that others are going to put them in a nursing home, they're not going to look after them. Next thing you know, they've taken them to their GP, got a letter saying they've got capacity to change their will, change their power of attorney, and then that individual that's exploited the situation has got the upper hand. And so there's a dispute in a tribunal about whether that was valid. So it is important to have independent people in the room, but I say having family with the independent person provides a better picture.
Certainly in acute, in specialist palliative care teams, community specialist palliative care, we would always use an interpreter for these conversations. Anything that is of importance, we would be using an interpreter for. And that's because of the fact that, sort of as Mayada was just saying, things can be changed, but often families want to protect their loved one, their family member, and there's often an idea in palliative care particularly that if we tell somebody the information that they're going to give up and therefore they will die, and that's something very commonly we hear in palliative care. However, often when you start having these conversations and you start asking the patient, resident, client what they understand, they have a lot more insight into what's going on than maybe we give them credit for. And so having that conversation where you've got a interpreter and family, and as Mayada said, it may becoming a two-pronged approach so that the family can help to soften it as it's being delivered, but the information isn't being minced. And particularly when there is a legal aspect involved, you would want to make very certain that that information is clear and that we haven't withheld anything because we felt like we were protecting our family member when in fact we could be ultimately doing a disservice.
Just in terms of advanced care planning directives, and again, this is for all members of the panel, and particularly yourself, Sonya, seeing this particularly in action in the later part of a person's life. What are some of the other things that do come into play? We've often talked today, I think we've intimated that often it's about decisions to treat or not treat illnesses in situations where things might be medically futile, that the person's quality of life has, so ebbed that, the extending their longevity is, becomes a question of, is this good for the person, to continue to treat them actively? But what are some of the other things that actually come into play? And do you see things, for example, from a cultural perspective about how they want things to be when they're in the terminal phase of their illness? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Absolutely. I think that's where the values and preferences really come in when it talks about advanced care planning. And it really looks more about being patient-centered, client-centered, resident-centered, and about what we were saying before about building the rapport, to truly understand the person and what matters to them and their family. Because when we look at palliative care isn't just about the individual that's going through it, it's about everyone around them and understanding what everyone needs in those moments when things are changing from a health perspective, so that the whole community can be best supported. So whether that may be that someone needs a religious leader or somebody wants some sort of music being played or whatever it might be, all of those things can actually become a part of an advanced care plan and makes the time a lot more personal and potentially valuable and intimate for the person and their family. So advanced care planning is a lot more than just the yes for CPR or no for antibiotics, etc. It's really looking about the whole person and what that means for everyone, and making sure that when those moments do come, that the health professionals looking after you make sure that we have a really good understanding of you individually. Something that obviously we've talked a lot about is if you've made decisions and you've had capacity, but what happens when someone comes in and you meet someone and they don't have capacity? We already passed the point of being able to have those conversations and talking to people and their families and potentially their GP that they've known for, 30 years, and really understanding, because some people, for instance, will have gone through life and said, whenever I got cancer, I wouldn't want chemo. And then the moment comes and the people around them that know them best are able to articulate that in those moments. So, having a plan, even if the person no longer has capacity, doesn't mean that it's no longer meaningful, because you're bringing those people together to really create the environment that's going to create an end of life that looks best for them.
Unfortunately, that just about concludes our time for today. What we have done is that there are a number of particular resources that have been mentioned today in terms of organisations such as Advanced Care Planning Australia and Palliative Care Victoria, and also the national framework for advanced care planning documents. We've put a number of those resources together as a slide deck, and that's actually up on our website. Until next month, thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again.